And now we're going to move to a founding board member, Carol Rodriguez from San Antonio, Texas, who will introduce our next speaker, the incredible Dr. Rogelio Sáenz. Thank you, Carol.
Hello, everyone. I'm Carol Rodriguez. I'm a founding board member of Lideramos. I have to say right now, I'm a little bit worried about my Zoom score, so hang in there with me. It's really a pleasure and an honor to introduce Dr. Rogelio Sáenz. Rogelio is really a premier researcher and on Latino impact and influence in the United States. He is a sociologist and a demographer at the University of Texas at San Antonio, where he's a professor in the Department of Demography. He's written extensively in the area of demography, Latino and Latinas, race and ethnicity, inequality, immigration, aging, public policy, and social justice. I really recommend you look for his work. He's a co-author of Latinos in the United States, Diversity and Change. He regularly writes op-ed essays for a variety of media outlets throughout the country. And he recently received the Cesar Estrada Chavez Award from the American Association for Access, Equality and Diversity. That was in 2018. He was also named as one of the top 10 Latino leaders in 2018 by the National Diversity Council for Latino Workplace Equity. And he received the 2020 Saber es Poder Academic Excellence Award from the University of Arizona's Department of Mexican American Studies. So it's my pleasure to introduce you. Dr. Sáenz, please join us.
Thank you very much. Buenos dias. Good morning. Normally, under normal conditions, I would be welcoming you to our beautiful city of San Antonio. But hopefully in the very near future, the group will be here. Let me see. I'm trying to see on the here we go. So I'd like to begin by thanking Juana and Carol for the invitation. This is a tremendous honor to be here to speak about my work and the trends that are going on, the very important trends, particularly during these times. Under normal conditions, the trends that we have in the Latino community are extremely important and are really running the country, directing the future of this country, but particularly under the pandemic that we're in, as well as political challenges that we're facing and so forth. And I'd also like to thank Jackie also for her help with the logistics and getting everything ready. So the title of my presentation, Numbers Don't Lie, Leveraging Demographics to Empower and Activate Latino Leaders. Provide a little bit of personal reflections, kind of how I got into this type of work. Provide a little bit in terms of the historical as well as contemporary shifts that we're seeing in the Latino demography, which has important political implications. And then kind of the reality of the US demography, where we have a very rapidly aging white population and a very youthful growing Latino population that is really setting the trend for the next coming decades. And then the challenges that we face and the opportunities, tremendous opportunities. I can't forget the pink elephant in the room, which is el COVID-19. Also a little bit on what is going on there, and then concluding with turning numbers on our side to political power and electing Latino and Latina leaders. A little bit about myself. I grew up in the Valley area here in Texas, South Texas, a little town of Mercedes. And I discovered sociology and then demography at Pan American University now, which is UT, University of Texas at the Rio Grande Valley. And there I really got into finding out about demography and how you use census data, for example, how you do analysis and so forth, how you illustrate and show disparities and so forth. So that became extremely important in my career development. And I have been studying and writing on the Latino population and its changing demography since the early 1980s. And it is very, very gratifying to see that a lot of the work that demographers and projections that demographers were talking about when we were a small population, that we represented 1 out of every 16 people in the United States, the kind of changes that have taken place and the actualization of those shifts that demographers were talking about. But yet at the same time, we have seen the political backlash against this growth, trying to control the growth of the Latino community, and in particular, control those numbers, which translate into political power. And this is really a major agenda that we have, that we should have, and that we deal with, because this is what is in many respects keeping us from achieving the full political power. A little bit on the changes that have taken place, very interesting changes. So we have in the mid 1960s to the early 2000s, large-scale international migration really changed the face of the Latino population in the United States. Migration from Mexico, which we had originally, but more so from the Caribbean, from Central America, as well as South America. Then at that time, we were growing both through natural increase, many more births than people dying in our population, but also with immigrants coming into our country. That has shifted. For most of the 20th century, we were concentrated in particular areas of the country, the Southwest, Florida, New York. But then when in the 1980s, you begin seeing the restructuring of the meatpacking industry, poultry processing, and that really shifted our geographic distribution. You really have the widespread distribution of Latinos all over the country into areas that are called the new destination areas. And Latinos have really transformed many of these communities that were very rural, that were experiencing population loss, economic loss, and so forth. And Latinos have come in to revitalize those communities. We've seen one of the very interesting things in the 1980s has been the trend of the Latino paradox, and that is that despite the low socioeconomic status and so forth, the lack of insurance and so forth compared to other groups, Latinos actually live longer than the white population. And this has really baffled demographers, epidemiologists, people in public health and so forth. Although right now, COVID is really challenging that long-standing paradox that has been in existence for the last three decades. And then we've seen, beginning with economic recession, we've seen the reduction of Mexican migration in particular. We've seen a major reduction in births among Latina women. And then we've seen, just like other groups are aging very rapidly, we're also beginning to experience some degree of aging as the growth that we were experiencing during the 1990s and 2000s has slowed down a bit. But the reality still is that with the US demography, it's an aging and a declining white population and a youthful and a growing Latino population. This is really the frame of this country over the last few decades, but particularly in the coming decades that are coming along. So this gives you a little bit of the demographic kind of differences, and really what has driven the population changes, the differences between whites and Latinos, and the changes that we're going to see over the coming decades. So with the Latino population, 31%, almost 1 out of every 3 of us in the Latino community is less than 18 years of age, compared to the white population that it's less than 1 in 5, 19%. With the population 65 and older, the elderly population or older population, 1 out of every 5 whites is 65 or older, compared to the Latinos where it's 1 out of every 14. So that if we see the child to elderly ratio, for example, among whites, it's less than 1, about 0.9 children per 1 elderly person. In contrast, for the Latino population, we have 4.25 young people, children, for every 1 older person in the population. And this is really the statistic here that really highlights the differences that we see in the population changes. And we can see with the white population, the median age is 43, compared to Latinos at 29. And you can think of people at age 43, for the most part, they finished kind of the childbearing ages and so forth. They're getting into the middle ages and so forth. But in terms of the Latino population at 29, that really reflects kind of the stage in the life course where people are establishing families, they're having kids and so forth. So that, again, illustrates the differences that we see. Demographers use age-sex pyramids to visually show how youthful or how old the population is. So that if you look on the left, that's the age-sex pyramid for Latinos. And on the vertical axis, here you have the age, 5-year age groups starting from 0 to 4, all the way to 85 and older. At the bottom, you have the percentage of the overall population of overall Latinos that are in those categories. And on the in purple, you have females, and in red, you have males. So this shows, for example, here with females, Latina 0 to 4 represent a little bit more than 4%. And you can see with the Latino population, it has a wider base at the bottom. And then towards the top, you have kind of a needle suggesting that there are relatively few older individuals in the Latino community and a much more youthful Latino community. Then you see the kind of a bigger bar at 10 to 14 compared to the youngest two. And that signifies some of the declines in fertility that we've seen. On the other hand, if you look at the right-hand side, you don't see with the Latino community, white girls at 4%. It's now a little bit more than 2%. So you can see this is a much, much older population, baby boomers then aging and so forth. And you don't have a needle at the top, but you have wider bars suggesting, again, a greater presence of older people in the white population. And we've really seen the significant changes over time in how the non-white Hispanic population that for long represented the large majority in this country has been shifting over time to about the time in about 1950 or so, 1960, where they represented about 88% of the population. Now, figures that I have here for 2018 are 60.4%, down to 60.1 in 2019. So you can see those shifts that have taken place, and Latinos have really played a significant role in those changes. I wrote a policy brief with a colleague of mine, Kenneth Johnson at the University of New Hampshire, and we did work, the last piece, this one I think was published in 2018, that it is already in 26 states around the country, including Florida, including New York, including California, where the white population, you have more deaths in the white population than you have white births, suggesting a natural decrease that has taken place in that population. And a few years ago, for the first time ever, you see that crisscross that shows more white deaths than white births overall in the nation as well. And in this map here, in those that are in dark blue and in light blue, those are the states that you have more white deaths than white births. Texas is still one of those where the white population is growing. There are more births than deaths. But for the other states, you've seen the obverse. And for long, demographers have been talking about that the white population was going to start declining. And it was by the time that these are population estimates from the population, from the US Census Bureau. And in 2015, the white population increased by about 37,000, an absolute growth of 37,000 at that time. In 2015 to 2016, they represented about a little bit, let me move the screen here, a little bit like 8,700 increase. So a very, very drop in a little gota, a little droplet in terms of population gain. And then in 2016 to 2017, you see the loss, about 98,000 fewer whites in 2017 than in 2016. Between 2017 and 2018, we see a 213 thousand decline. And then the more recent suggests almost 390,000 fewer whites than, in 2019 than 2018. So what demographers have been projecting over the last 3 decades, we're really starting to see at this particular point in our history. And a little bit on the growth of the Latino population, because it's been the tremendous growth. It started in 1980 with about 14.6 million of us. And then we've more than quadrupled during that time to 2019, where for the first time then we've gone over the 60 million. So now we're at 60.6 million, closing in on 61 million very rapidly. So you can see the tremendous and a very significant growth that was taking place between 2000 and 2010, which has slowed down a little bit. But here, this chart here represents the importance that Latinos are playing for the US demography. So even in 1980, when we accounted for 6% of the US population, 1 out of every 16, we accounted for 1 out of every 3 people that were added to the US population. By the year 2010 to 2015, we accounted for 56% of the people added during this time. And even though we've slowed down in our growth, we're still accounting for 52% of the people in our country that have been added through births or through migration over the last, that's supposed to be 2010 to 2019. And then we've seen our growth so that in 1980, we accounted 1 out of every 16 people in the US was Latino. 2019, it's now 18.5%. We're closing in on that 20% mark where we're going to represent 1 out of every 5 people in the population. And the Census Bureau, given these particular trends, a few years ago had indicated already that the non-white population, which will include Latinos, African Americans, Asians, Native Americans, multiracials, and so forth, are going to represent the numerical majority at that time between 2044. You can imagine the political pushback that we've seen and the rhetoric that has come out and so forth. And a colleague of mine, Dudley Poston, who retired from Texas A&M University, and we did this piece for the conversation that was called Children of Color Already Make Up the Majority of Kids in Many States. So that you already see a non-white majority led predominantly by the Latino population. But we can see here the single ages. You can see that at age 10 and below, Latinos, non-whites are already the majority. And that's going to continue the trend in the coming years. And already we see there are 14 states here with data from 2018, 14 states around the country where non-whites already represented the majority with respect to children. So this really has implications for our future in many respects throughout institutions, education, the workforce, the healthcare, the political structure, and so forth. Very much, very powerful changes that are going on in our country. And with these demographic shifts that we've seen, and the growth particularly of the Latino community, and especially of the Mexican origin community, we have seen the challenges, the pushback, that we've seen the racialization of Latinos, the politics of immigration, and then very importantly, efforts around the country, all the way from federal, all the way to state, and all the way to community level, that has tried to minimize this population growth, and in particular, minimize the potential political power that comes with our growing numbers. So we see the elements of racialization of immigrants and the construction of the public enemy. We have become the public enemy, as even before Donald Trump labeled us as rapists and bad hombres and so forth. That was already a symbol and so forth that was already in place for the last few decades. Trump has just taken it to a much higher level. But some of these elements that we've seen has been the dehumanization of immigrants and the establishment of the public enemy, the criminalization of immigrants, the exclusion, detention, and deportation of immigrants, border security, the commodification of immigrants in the detention centers where you have the Core Civic, GEO, and these organizations that are private or private corporations that are making so much money, so much wealth, and so much wealth for their investors by detaining and imprisoning people of color and immigrants, Central Americans that are fleeing from violence and seeking refuge in this country, the children that are being put in cages and so forth. And then we've seen the erasing of historical context. In the US narrative, it is as if we just got here a few decades ago rather than have been here for generations and generations and generations. We've seen then the policies and efforts to minimize the political power of people of color. And in the larger scheme of things, we've seen the maintenance of white supremacy, or as the logo in the Trump campaign had become, making America great again, meant taking us back to that 1950s, 1960s, where whites represented 88% of the population, and these demographic shifts had not taken place. We've also seen in the political arena efforts to try to push back that particular growth, and particularly the political and economic power that comes with that growth. So we've seen around the country over the last few decades, state and local anti-immigrant policies. We've seen cuts to public school education. Here in Texas in 2011, at the time that Latino children became the majority, more than 50% in Texas schools, the Texas legislature cut about $5.6 billion from public education, and we haven't recovered from that. We've seen the attack on the top 10% in university admissions. We've seen Supreme Court cases that have tried to keep Latinos out of enrolling in institutions such as the UC system, here, the University of Texas, A&M, and so forth. The booming incarceration of people of color in the African-American community, as well as in the Latino community. And if you want to disenfranchise people, you put them in jail. And that's what was done in terms of the criminalization of immigrants, in terms of get tough drug policies and so forth, that really saturated prisons and so forth, made a lot of private corporations extremely rich, got politicians reelected, and then took our vote away from us, and also for many people ruined lives and families. We've seen the Trump mass deportation plan and his plan to end DACA. We've seen the political redistricting here in Texas. We really, people of color and Latinos in particular, got cheated out of the benefits that come from us providing the impetus for Texas at that time to get additional congressional seats, 4 congressional seats. We've had the voter ID laws that have tried to make it more difficult instead of easier for people to vote. We've seen the purging of voter lists. And more recently, we have seen the Trump administration efforts to insert the citizenship question. And even though it didn't get into the census, that damage and the confusion and already was done. And we've seen the efforts to try to eliminate unauthorized immigrants from being put in the equation for the redistricting. And we've seen the ending, the push to end the enumeration of in the 2020 census early, the push to end it in a week or so, less than a week, and so forth, which represents efforts to minimize our numbers. And right now, where it is Latinos in particular and people of color that have been disproportionately hit and by COVID and the pandemic. So now I want to, in line with the music, and I love music, and this is music by Carol and I. We have a dear friend of ours who is Rodolfo Lopez. Let's see if I can. And one thing is, I probably need to get the audio. Just bear with me. I still have trouble in my class trying to maneuver the this now. So Rodolfo Lopez, here from San Antonio, great friend of Carol Rodriguez and myself, and he did this this song a few years ago, but it is still very relevant, particularly in the time that we're at, and I hope you enjoy it. Hopefully it'll play. Ya basta.
Ya basta con este circo que ahora estamos viviendo. Todo nos están quitando y nada están repartiendo, pero ¿a quién voy a culpar? No hubo tiempo para votar. Impuestos siguen subiendo, ya no podemos pagar. Más y más nos están quitando, nada nos van a dejar, pero ¿a quién voy a culpar? No hice tiempo para votar. Lo que le pido a mi gente, no se dejen engañar. Enseñen su inteligencia y todo mundo a votar. Solo de esta manera las cosas pueden cambiar. Y a los derechos civiles todos estamos perdiendo. Los terroristas que buscan se encuentran en el gobierno, pero no puedo quejar. No hice tiempo para votar. La educación de mis hijos se está quedando atrás. Quieren que seamos burros, con manos para trabajar, pero sin poder leer. ¿Cómo diablos voy a votar? Lo que les pido a mi gente, no se dejen engañar. Enseñen su inteligencia y todo mundo a votar. Solo de esta manera las cosas van a cambiar. Y a los servicios sociales todos están recortando. Dicen que no hay dinero, pero se están empachando. ¿Con qué me puedo quejar? No hubo tiempo para votar. El precio de medicina ahora está por los cielos. No hay remedio para el anciano, solo el que tenga dinero. Por no votar he perdido el derecho más querido. Lo que les pido a mi gente, no se dejen engañar. Enseñen su inteligencia y todo mundo a votar. Solo de esa manera las cosas pueden cambiar. Toda mi vida he pagado los impuestos al gobierno. Ahora que estoy jubilado, dicen que vaya al infierno, que el gobierno está quebrado. Será por ser malgastado el español que nos hablan, es nomás por interés. Ya cuando son elegidos, it's English only otra vez. ¿Cómo me puedo quejar? No hubo tiempo para votar. El cambio, aunque muy lento, sí se puede puede realizar. Si todos nos proponemos y salemos a votar, solo de esa manera las cosas pueden cambiar.
All right, hopefully you enjoyed that song. It really, if there is a song that empowers us and really excites us about the challenges that we face and the homework assignment that we have in terms of making sure that we go out, we vote, we get registered to vote here in Texas. October the 5th is the final, the registration. But I wanted to interject there before I continue with the presentation, but because this represents all these challenges and the backlash that we're facing and the efforts that have tried to minimize really our being and the numbers that we have and the potential for power and again, kind of erasing our history, suggesting that we're really just visitors here and so forth, despite our long history and the beautiful music from my wonderful friend, Rodolfo Lopez. Now, the reality, one of the things that we see with the Trump discourse and so forth, and a lot of the discourse we've seen is with respect to Mexican migration. The reality is that with respect to Mexican migration, it has fallen tremendously. And this is a piece that I did for the conversation. Far fewer Mexican immigrants are coming to the U.S., and those who are more educated. So really you've seen the change in demography as well. So you see this particular chart shows in the year 2003 to 2007, there was a growth of about 1.7 million persons from Mexico that were coming here. And you can see that has gone down in half the last two time periods here. So significant decline.
Rogelio, do you have a PowerPoint to share?
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. This is.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you see
there
it?
we go.
Okay. This is what the trouble that I was having last night in my class. Okay. So this is the piece here that appeared in the conversation. Far fewer Mexican immigrants are coming to the U.S. and those who are more educated. And here's the numbers that I was showing: the 2003 to 2007, about 1.7 million people that were coming from Mexico to the United States, and that has been cut in half really the last two time periods. And you've seen it all over the country with the exception of these yellow states where the population is relatively small in those areas, but in red, that represents the decrease in Latino migration from the period of 2007 to 2017. So significant, very different reality and data, empirical data, compared to the rhetoric, the political rhetoric that we see. And another thing that we find is that while all other groups of immigrants have been growing since that period, 2007 to the present, you see it in other Spanish-speaking Latin American and Caribbean countries. You see it in Asia. You see it in Europe. You see it in Africa. You see it all over the world, the rising immigrants coming to the United States. The first one from Mexico, you see the significant drops that have taken place. And one of we have that our demography represents our strength, but one of the challenges that we have has to do with the political challenges of our demography. And if we compare the Latino population with the white population, you can see the first part here in the 18 and older, these are the citizen voting age, voting eligible population. Here you can see that in our Latino community, we represent about slightly half of our 60.5 million Latinos are eligible to vote, compared to the white population that it's 80% of their population. In our case, 31% of our people are less than 18 years of age, compared to 19% for the white population. And then with persons over 18 who are not US citizens, 18% among us are not eligible to vote, compared to 1.3 million. So you can see, even though these demographic shifts have taken place in terms of the votes and so forth. So this is really the need that we need to push to make sure that more people get registered and more people get out to vote. But yet there are the opportunities, and here's the political advantages of our demography, turning our numbers into political power. And here, I'll show you, here's really our strength that we have today, and particularly in the coming years. And I illustrate here with two states, Texas and Arizona, and these are the number of children in our population. So in Texas, for example, we have 3.6, nearly 3.7 million children. Every year in the state of Texas, more than 203,000 Latino children turn age 18. Every month, 16,000, about 17,000 turn 18. Every week, 4,200 turn age 18. Every day, 605. Every hour, 25 are turning age 18. And by the time that I've been talking, nearly 13 have turned age 18. This is really our political power that we have here. And you can see the next column there, the white population with the aging that we see, the much smaller growth so that, well, we add 203 thousand more potential voters to our numbers. Whites are adding just 128,000. So this is really a sense of the potential that exists in terms of turning our numbers into political power. Population projections of the U.S. Census Bureau here shows again what I've been telling you over my presentation in terms of the changes. We've seen the changes in the white population that has really been coming down, and then the major increase in the Latino population. We're expected to more than double more than double or about double between now and 2060, and a decline in the white population. And the white population is expected to drop from about 61% in 2016 to about 44% in 2060, while the Latino population is projected to grow from 18% in 2016 to about 28% in 2016. And this accounts for a little bit of the slowdown that we've experienced. And now el COVID, the 19, that's another of the things that is right now the challenges. And I started collecting data when it became extremely clear that the impact was going to hit us hard in our Latino community. I started going through the dashboards of states and putting the data together, and have been writing a monthly blog for Latino Decisions every month on keeping trends on what is going on. And a couple of slides that I'll show you that encapsulates the differences in the demography here of the fatalities of COVID-19. On the right-hand side, you have the white population. And in the white population, in purple there, 89.4%, nearly 9 out of every 10 whites that have lost their lives to COVID have been persons 65 and older. In the case of the Latino community, it's a little more than 6 out of 10. You look at persons then 50 to 64 with Latinos, a quarter of our deaths, of our beloved people that have lost their lives have been in that 50 to 64 category, compared to about 1 out of every 11 whites. And then in the population less than 50 years of age, 1 out of every 9 of us that have passed away from COVID have been persons less than 50 years of age, compared to 1.6% of less, about 1 out of every 50 in the white community. So this really encapsulates the differences and the different impact that COVID has had on Latinos and the white community. And these are the the death rates from COVID-19 for each of the age categories, 10-year age categories. And you can see in the column for Latinos, that would be the number of Latinos that are dying per 100,000 thus far as of early September. And then you have the death rates for the white population. And then in the last column is the Latino to white ratios. And you can see that even for the child population, children are dying about 2.9% higher of the children that have died from COVID-19. About 45% of those have been Latino children. Among the workforce, people who are out there in the front lines that have been there since the beginning and so forth, and that don't have the luxury of being able to work from home. They have been disproportionately impacted. Death rates, for example, among persons 25 to 34, 7 times higher dying from COVID. At 35 to 44, 9 times higher. At 45 to 54, 8 times higher, and so forth. So these represent another of those challenges, and a lot of this comes from the systemic racism that we've experienced in our own communities, as well as in the African American communities, and the hits that we have taken. And it is particularly important now that we elect leaders that are going to, and many of those from our own community, that are going to represent our interests, because we really are going to have advocates for us that are going to be pushing for our needs, making sure that we're not left behind in the recovery, because we know that the recovery has not begun and it's going to be taking a long, long time. So the closing thoughts here would be that Latinos, we've seen that we've been driving the US demography as well as the US economy. Latinos have been disproportionately represented among the nation's growth in business owners. The new business, people who are opening businesses have been disproportionately Latinos. People who have been buying homes have been disproportionately Latinos. People who, the workforce has been particularly Latino. Undergraduate college students, Latinos are also driving that growth in enrollment, while the white population has declined in terms of the number of people because of the aging of the population. Latinos are scheduled to increase dramatically as voters in the presidential election next month, yet we don't get that respect that comes with these accolades. In many respects, we've been kind of put out of the public discourse in terms of the conventions and so forth, including the Democratic Convention, that we weren't at the table there among the speakers and so forth. And the numbers that are on our side need to be really leveraged to bring about bringing our political power and making sure that we groom our Latino and Latina leaders so that we can elect them and that they will be representing our particular best interests. And there is a tremendous need to engage our future, and our future are youth, making sure that we engage them in the political process and so forth. And right now, I think we've seen with Black Lives Matter and the pandemic disproportionate impact on Latinos and so forth, never before, I think, has the inequality and the challenges that we have faced laying so bare and open in our footsteps about what needs to be done and so forth. So the time that we need to start is now, right now, and that we will need to pull each other up now as more than ever before as we finally get out of this pandemic in the coming years, because it's going to take a lot, and a lot of the growth and increases and so forth that we've experienced and so forth, we need to make sure that we continue in that upward trajectory. And the importance of grooming those political leaders, not only our political leaders, but economic leaders, educational leaders, health leaders, and so forth, is so crucial to our sustainability, as well as the sustainability of the country. And with that, I'll conclude and take any questions or comments that people may have.
Thank you very much, Rogelio. What an amazing presentation about our numbers, the impact that we can have in the future, and the call to action, particularly around voting and about getting our young people involved.
Yeah.
So Jackie, do we have a few questions?
Well, a few is an understatement. Yeah, so let me start with the easy one. Dr. Rogelio, one of the big things everyone's been saying is thank you, thank you, thank you. So they want to know how they can contact you. So is it safe to say it's this email address right there?
Yeah, that's the best way to contact me. I'm always answering emails and so forth, unless I'm preparing for class. All of a sudden, the last couple of weeks in this Zoom environment, it's been taking my time in class preparation. But yeah, the email address is the best. Yeah.
Great, thank you. One woman just wanted to say for the song, how comforting it was to hear her culture in a professional symposium setting such as this. So for you and for Carol, although I think Carol saw it as you were talking, many people liked the song and wanted to have a link to it. So Carol is going to send that over to us so we can post it on the Lideramos website. And I think Teresa has been sharing it with people as well.
And one additional point that I'll make is that Rodolfo Lopez, the singer, and Carol, they're the founders of the Conjunto Heritage Taller here in San Antonio. Now I think it's 15 years, if I'm correct, 15 years or so, that have been really a rich cultural tradition here in San Antonio, and that have trained many young people that have gone on to play conjunto music and so forth, as well as people of all ages that have learned el acordeón, bajo sexto, and so forth, and many of those performing and so forth. It's a very rich treasure that we have here in San Antonio.
Thank you. Another question we have gotten several times is, will they get access to your slides?
Yes, if the organization can make them available, or they can contact me also, and I'll be glad to send them.
Sure. And if you'd like to send them to us, we can send it out in an email.
Okay.
If it's less overwhelming that way. What states do you see leading in Latino voter registration?
Well, right now here in Texas, we've been on the verge of becoming the purple state. The midterm elections, we saw some major victories. The big one wasn't there when Beto O'Rourke almost beat Ted Cruz. But I think in Texas, it was announced yesterday that we've seen record numbers of new people who are registering to vote and so forth. I think what we've seen in Arizona has been another major kind of growth that we've seen in terms of the political structure and the political power of Latinos in Arizona has really been gratifying to see, and the challenges that they experience in terms of what's the guy's name, the Sheriff Joe Arpaio and all those, and the show me your papers and so forth, and how you really have the organization of political leadership and the economic business community and so forth playing a significant role in the grassroots organization. I think Florida represents another population where we're going to see tremendous increase there, particularly because we've seen a significant growth in the Puerto Rican population in Florida, which is another state, Florida, that could potentially turn blue. And I think that Puerto Ricanos are going to play a significant role in terms of the changing political structure. So those are three that come to mind. And of course, Nevada, we've seen Nevada has been really, has already in many ways achieved some major victories, and they're going to continue achieving those kind of victories as well.
Oh, that's excellent. Thank you. A lot of questions keep coming in, so I'm going to do my best to get to as many.
Sure.
This one says, if Latinx people are not a race but a culture, how do we identify ourselves accurately in demographic questions like the census, particularly if there is not a lot of connection to family history to know?
Yeah, the important thing I think right now with respect to and the terms that we use within our group, I think it reflects kind of the diversity that exists within our community, not only social class diversity, not only national origin diversity, but we also see in terms of the rise, for example, of the Latinx identification and so forth, the generational kind of shifts that we see, the differences that we see across age groups and so forth. So I think that in terms of the census, the important thing is in terms of identifying, in terms of the identification, the question is whether you're Hispanic or Latino, and identifying those of us that are identifying yes. And then the next question is which specific group, Mexican, Puerto Rican, etc., and identifying which particular one. And there is the fill in the blank for putting in those categories. And then there is the next question is the racial category, which has always been kind of a puzzle for many of us, that many of us don't necessarily consider ourselves white. Many don't consider themselves African American, others Native Americans, and so forth. So there has been kind of the other category that has been used. Although the Census Bureau, more and more you see the shift to try to push people into choosing the white category. There's another story of that. If we had more time, I would be able to tell you that. But again, I think that the diversity that we have in terms of identity reflects the beautiful diversity that exists in our community. But it is important that making sure that we identify as one, the most important one is the Hispanic and Latino, because right now, particularly when we see, and this is again getting on my soapbox, that we need everyone to turn out to get counted, that if you haven't gotten counted, or someone that you know hasn't gotten counted, we need everybody counted, because those are the challenges that we had already in the pandemic, already in so many respects, that we had the challenges with the citizenship question that was threatened to be put in there and so forth. And two things come from being counted. One is political representation, so that the distribution of the 435 House of Representative seats come from the count from the census. That's how come President Trump wants to close next week, or less than a week, he wants to close the numbers and so forth. That's how come he wanted to take out unauthorized immigrants from being counted in redistricting and so forth. So those are the challenges. And the second way in which those numbers are used is for the distribution of federal resources that support federal programs that we all use, either ourselves, our loved ones, and so forth. All Head Start programs, health programs, funding of hospitals, funding of education, Pell Grants, veteran services, roads, constructions, everything, you name it, it comes from there. And we're going to need to be represented so that we get the proper resources that we need, and particularly mostly in the time of the pandemic. We're coming out of this major blow that we've taken, that we and African Americans have been disproportionately taking. We're going to need those resources in order to recover from this major hit. So every decade it's extremely important, but here it's even in magnitudes of importance that I cannot underestimate the importance of being counted in the census, along with voting, making sure that you're registered to vote, and then getting out there come November 3rd and voting.
Thank you. Okay, do I have time for a few more? Because one just came in too. Do you have a presentation that can be shared in social media about how the two presidential candidates support services most utilized by Latinos?
I don't have that. We haven't done the analysis. One of the things a colleague of mine, Salvador Contreras, was an economist at UT RGV Rio Grande Valley. We're working on an analysis that looks at some patterns in terms of more looking at the trends that are taking place in jobs and income, and particularly with healthcare insurance over the last 10 years and so forth. So, but with the challenges have been getting the data with trying to get in terms of the Trump administration, in terms of the number of complete years that we have, has been one challenge. But we're putting something together, and we hope to get something out there in terms of the public discourse in the next week or two.
Great, thank you. Okay, so Lisa has a two-part question. So the first part, as we consider the impact of global warming and the subsequent climate migration to the US and Canada, does the term climate migrant carry a different social connotation than immigrant in social and political contexts? So I'll let you answer that one, and then I'll ask her second question.
Yeah, and in terms of one of the things that we've seen, I think, in terms of the movement of people all over the world, and not only here to the United States, but all over the world, a lot of the roots of that, of course, have to do with the structural inequality, the globalization, the uprooting of people, and so forth. That are all of these are also tied in to the ecological factors, the environmental kind of factors, and so forth that we have seen. So immigrants that are coming to our country have been these ecological climate warming kind of immigrants that have come into our country. I think that that we've been sort of focused on kind of the politics of immigration, that we've kind of forgotten that element, but it's increasingly becoming clear. And I think that people who are in the forefront of the bringing knowledge of the global warming and so forth, and the impact that it's had, has really opened the eyes, and I think, of trying to make that connection. And we see it also with refugees all over the world, again, political power and so forth, but many also tied into fleeing from their countries, their homes, and so forth, that are being devastated by global warming. And we see it here in our own country in terms of the global warming that we've seen, and its potential impact in terms of movements and so forth in this country.
All right, Rogelio, I think we need to thank you for this wonderful presentation. I also want to let people know that the symposium is being taped and will be on YouTube and on our website, so you can catch this presentation again, or bring your staff or your group together and watch it also. I think that you've put the growing demographics and the political impact of that into an incredible frame that, like Rosemary said, an incredible frame that we can use not only to promote more leadership in our community, but to engage our people and let them know how important this is. So we want to thank you, and we hope we will see you in San Antonio next year at our 4th annual symposium.
Yep.
And that you become part of the Lideramos family, because our goal is to activate Latino leaders across the country. So thank you so much. Great. And we have a slide that's going to come up that's a reflection slide for people to think about some of the things that you've talked about as we pull up our other presenter.
Okay, and just one little point is that if I have a listserv also of my writings and so forth, so if people want to get on the list, they can just send me an email, let me know, and I'll add them to that list.
Okay, and if you send that to Lideramos, we will make sure all of the participants that are on today receive this information, because we want to keep building our community.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Dios
thank
te
you.
bendiga.
Okay, gracias.
Gracias. Un aplauso. So,
Thank you very much.
You can put that up.
You got it.
All my friends are the low rider. The low rider is a little higher. Low